The Vanishing Heiress. Chapter 1, A Disquieting Request. The gaslight in my office burned low, hissing faintly as though in complaint at the late hour. Papers lay scattered across the desk before me, half-finished reports of railway thefts, counterfeiting schemes, and one troublesome band of stagecoach robbers that had eluded us in Missouri. I had meant to finish reading them before the night was through. But as the clock struck 9, a brisk knock at the door interrupted my solitude. "Enter," I called, expecting one of my operatives with an update. Instead, the door swung open to admit a tall gentleman of imposing stature, his silver-handled cane striking the floor with deliberate weight. He removed his top hat with a stiffness that betrayed both pride and unease. "Allan Pinkerton," he said, his voice clipped and commanding. "I am Henry Whitmore. Perhaps my name is familiar to you?" Indeed it was. Whitmore was one of Chicago's most prominent industrialists, his fortune built upon railroads, steel, and rumor had it, the occasional ruthless deal. I gestured toward a chair. "Sit, Mr. Whitmore. What matter brings you to my agency at this hour?" He lowered himself into the chair as if the weight of his worries exceeded even the bulk of his body. His eyes, cold and steel-gray, searched mine with an urgency I seldom saw in men of his station. "My daughter," he said at last. "She is missing." I folded my hands atop the desk. "How long?" "2 nights," he answered. "Clara disappeared during a soirée I hosted at my home. One moment she was conversing with a group of acquaintances, and the next she was gone. Servants searched the grounds. The police assure me she has simply eloped." "Nonsense. Clara is devoted to her family. This is abduction, Mr. Pinkerton. I require your immediate assistance." The word "require" pricked me like a thorn. Whitmore was accustomed to commanding clerks and laborers, but in my office, it was I who set the course. Still, the matter of a vanished young woman was grave. Why would the police suspect elopement? I asked. He shifted uncomfortably, tapping the cane against the floor. "Because Clara is admired by many suitors. She is beautiful, intelligent, and, if I may be frank, the sole heir to considerable fortune. But she is not a frivolous girl. She would never abandon her family in such a manner." "Who were the last people to see her?" "Several guests. Some claim she stepped into the garden for air. Others believe she retired early. But when the music ended and the guests departed, she was nowhere to be found. There was no carriage ordered, no message left behind. Nothing." I regarded him steadily. "You understand, Mr. Whitmore, that to proceed I must question everyone present at the soirée. Family included." His jaw tightened. "If that is what it takes." I leaned back, considering. Too often had I seen powerful men conceal truths for fear of scandal. The intensity in his eyes told me he was desperate, but desperation could stem from guilt as much as love. "Very well," I said. "Provide me with the guest list and the names of your household servants. I shall also need access to your home." He drew from his breast pocket a folded sheet of paper and laid it on the desk. I anticipated as much. "Here are the names. I will instruct my butler to admit you." I studied the list, noting familiar surnames, bankers, politicians, merchants of no small influence. Among them one name caught my attention, Charles Beaumont, a British critic known for his acerbic pen and ruthless exposure of industrial corruption. His presence at a Whitmore soirée was peculiar. "Tell me, Mr. Whitmore," I said. "Why invite Beaumont, a man who thrives on scandal, to your celebration?" Whitmore's mouth twitched. Business requires strange bedfellows. He was in Chicago on lecture. A friend suggested his presence might lend distinction. I regret the decision now. I tucked the paper into my coat pocket. I will begin my inquiries tomorrow. For tonight, return home and see that no evidence is disturbed. He rose heavily, pressing his hat to his chest. Mr. Pinkerton, I trust you will treat this matter with the utmost discretion. Clara's reputation must not be sullied. And, my enemies would delight in exploiting such misfortune. I stood as well. Discretion is the lifeblood of this agency. But truth, Mr. Whitmore, will not be sacrificed for reputation. For a moment, his gaze hardened, and I glimpsed the ruthless magnate beneath the worried father. Then he inclined his head and departed, his cane tapping down the hallway until silence reclaimed the office. I sank back into my chair, the weight of the case settling over me. A vanished heiress, a father too eager to control the narrative, and whispers of suitors with motives as varied as greed and love. Something in Whitmore's tale rang hollow, though I could not yet name it. I lit a fresh cigar and stared at the smoke curling toward the ceiling. My instincts told me that Clara Whitmore's disappearance was no simple elopement. The city had grown fat on wealth, but corruption ran beneath its streets like sewage, hidden yet pervasive. If Clara had indeed been taken, it was not by chance, it was part of a design. At that moment, a light rap on the side door announced Timothy Webster, one of my most trusted operatives. His keen eyes immediately caught the folded list on my desk. "Another midnight rescue, Chief?" he asked with a half-smile. "Perhaps," I said. "A young woman gone missing from one of Chicago's wealthiest homes. Police call it elopement. I suspect otherwise." Webster's smile faded. "You'll want me to begin at the Whitmore estate?" "Tomorrow at first light," I confirmed. "Speak with the servants quietly. They see more than masters imagine. And Webster, keep a special eye on this name." I tapped Beaumont's entry on the list. A critic who thrives on scandal is an odd guest for a magnate's fate. Webster nodded, slipping the paper into his pocket. "Understood." When he departed, I extinguished the lamp and drew the curtains. Outside, the streets of Chicago lay quiet, but beneath the hush of night I fancied I could hear the restless pulse of a city forever scheming. Somewhere, a frightened girl was either hiding or held against her will. Tomorrow would begin the hunt. As I locked the office door behind me, I could not shake the sense that this case would strike deeper than most. For when the wealthy cry foul, there are always secrets behind their tears. Chapter 2, Whispers in Society. Morning sunlight slanted across the city, glinting on the smoke-stained windows of Chicago's business district. By the time I arrived at the Whitmore estate on Prairie Avenue, Timothy Webster had already been at work for several hours. His discreet conversations with the household staff had yielded fragments of information, like pieces of a puzzle still lacking its frame. I was admitted by Whitmore's butler, a lean man named Jarvis, whose expression suggested he had been instructed to cooperate but not to volunteer more than necessary. I entered the drawing room, where the faint scent of roses lingered, masking something less pleasant, fear. Clara Whitmore's absence hung over the household like a storm cloud. Whitmore himself descended the staircase as I waited. His cravat was impeccably tied, his waistcoat immaculate, yet his eyes bore the fatigue of a man who had slept little. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said briskly, "have you discovered anything?" "Not yet," I replied. "But patience is the cornerstone of inquiry. Your servants have been forthcoming. I shall now speak with some of your guests." His lips thinned. "Tread carefully. These are men and women of standing. A whisper against them could ripple disastrously. I assure you, Mr. Whitmore, I whisper only to the truth, I said. With that, I departed, taking the guest list with me. My first call was upon the home of Madame Elise Charon, a French widow of means who had attended the soirée. She received me in a salon cluttered with embroidered cushions and the scent of heavy perfume. "Ah, Monsieur Pinkerton," she said, adjusting the lace at her sleeve. "The poor girl, she is lost, yes? But perhaps not lost unwillingly." I raised a brow. "What do you mean, madam?" She smiled knowingly. "Clara is young, beautiful, spirited. She was often in conversation with the violinist, Monsieur Albrecht. A handsome fellow, with the dark eyes that make foolish promises. He played for us that evening, and I noted the way she watched him. A girl watches a man so only when her heart is in play. Did you see them leave together?" Her smile faded. "No. He left alone, I am certain. But I tell you, Clara was restless. There was, how do you say, an inquietude. A nervousness. She laughed too loudly, glanced too often at the door. It was as if she feared something. I pressed her for more, but she had nothing further to offer beyond speculation. Still, her observation of Clara's unease was valuable. From Madame Charon's residence I traveled to the offices of Charles Beaumont, the British critic. Beaumont was a tall, lean man with the angular features of a hawk. His accent lent every word a cutting authority. "You inquire about Miss Whitmore," he said when I broached the subject. "Charming girl, though scarcely remarkable beyond her fortune. She spoke to me briefly during the soirée, asking idle questions about my writings. I found her manner distracted, as though her mind dwelt elsewhere." "Elsewhere, or with someone?" I asked. Beaumont gave a thin smile. "Possibly both. She was courteous, but she seemed ill at ease. Now, between us, Mr. Pinkerton, I should not be surprised if the young lady's disappearance was contrived to avoid some unpleasant arrangement. Rich families often make pawns of their daughters." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And Whitmore has enemies. Many. If she was taken, it was by those who would strike at him through her. If she fled, it was to escape his iron hand." I regarded him closely. His candor might be genuine, or it might be the performance of a man who thrived on scandal. Either way, his words reinforced my suspicion that Whitmore's version of events was not the whole truth. By afternoon, Webster returned to my office with his own findings. He had traced the violinist, Albrecht, to a modest boarding house near Dearborn Station. "Speaks with a German accent," Webster reported, "but not a strong one. Claims to have studied in Vienna. Neighbors say he keeps irregular hours, entertains visitors at odd times. And here's the curious part, he placed on my desk a lady's glove, delicate and torn. Found in the alley behind the boarding house. The initials, CW, are stitched inside. I examined it carefully. The fabric was smeared faintly with blood. Too convenient, I muttered. As though someone wanted us to find it. Webster nodded. That was my thought as well. He denied knowing anything about Clara's disappearance, swore he left the soirée alone, went straight to the boarding house, and retired. But he grew nervous when I mentioned your name. Good, I said. Fear often loosens the tongue. Still, I was not convinced the violinist was our culprit. He seemed more a pawn than a player. If Clara had truly been abducted, the motive would not be passion, it would be power. That evening, I dined with an old acquaintance, a newspaperman named James Callahan, whose ear for gossip was unmatched. Over roasted beef and potatoes, I inquired about Clara's other known suitors. "There's the banker, Arthur Bellamy," Callahan said between mouthfuls. "A man with deep pockets and shallow scruples. He's been courting Miss Whitmore, or rather, her inheritance. Lately his investments have soured. If he doesn't secure new funds soon, he may face ruin. Some whisper he sought to bind his fortunes with hers." I sipped my ale thoughtfully. "And Clara's opinion of him?" Callahan shrugged. "She tolerated his attention, but I doubt she favored him. Too cold, too calculating. Not the sort to stir affection." A calculating man in financial peril was dangerous indeed. Bellamy might well consider abduction a path to advantage, or, if not abduction, collusion with those who wished Whitmore harm. When I returned to my office, the city was shrouded in fog. I reviewed the day's notes, arranging them like pieces on a chessboard. Clara was restless the night of her disappearance. She had confided in no one, yet her behavior betrayed fear. Albrecht, the violinist, was entangled somehow, but whether by guilt or coercion remained uncertain. Bellamy the banker stood to gain much if Clara's fate could be bent to his purpose. And Whitmore himself, my client, was far from above suspicion, his urgency tinged with calculation. As the fog pressed against the windows and the lamplight flickered low, I resolved upon the next step. I would confront Albrecht directly, stripping away the veneer of charm to uncover the truth he sought to hide. But I would also have Webster dig into Bellamy's accounts. In my experience, money left trails more damning than footprints. The case was young, but already it reeked of intrigue. Clara Whitmore had vanished into the shadows of Chicago's society, leaving behind whispers, doubts, and a single blood-stained glove. Somewhere in the city, her fate was being decided, and it fell to me to wrench her from the grasp of men who considered her a prize rather than a person. I extinguished the lamp, the smoke curling like ghostly fingers into the dark. The hunt had begun in earnest, and I would not rest until the truth, however ugly, stood revealed. Chapter 3, Tracks in the Shadows. The boarding house on Dearborn Street was a nondescript brick building with shutters in need of paint and a crooked sign that read "Rooms for Let." It sat wedged between a tobacconist's shop and a narrow alley, the sort of place a man might disappear without notice. Timothy Webster and I arrived just after dusk, our coats drawn tight against the March chill. The fog had thickened again, rolling in from the lake, turning the street lamps into pale halos. Inside, the house smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool. A landlady with arms like rolling pins greeted us with suspicion until Webster produced a polite smile and a silver coin. We were shown to Albrecht's quarters on the second floor. The violinist opened the door himself. His dark hair was disheveled, his collar undone. At sight of me his face paled. "Mr. Pinkerton," he stammered. "What is the meaning of this visit?" "Meaning," I said evenly, stepping into the room, "is something you may help me uncover. Where is Miss Clara Whitmore?" His eyes widened. "I swear to you, sir, I know nothing. I admired the young lady, yes, but I had no part in her disappearance." The room bore the modest furnishings of a bachelor: iron bedstead, small writing desk, violin case leaning against the wall. Yet upon the desk lay a folded handkerchief embroidered with the letter C. I picked it up, letting the silence stretch. Albrecht licked his lips. "That was a gift," he said quickly. "From Miss Whitmore, months ago. She admired my playing." "And the glove with her initials, found in the alley?" I pressed. He raised both hands. Planted, no doubt, to incriminate me. I swear, I left the Whitmore residence alone that night. Someone must wish me ruined. His protestations rang rehearsed, but not entirely false. I had seen guilty men tremble, and I had seen innocent stumble in fear. Albrecht seemed caught between both states. Who would wish you ruined? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. I cannot say. But there was a gentleman who visited me 2 days past. A man dressed in black, with gloves though it was not cold. He offered me money if I would allow certain items to be found near my lodging. I refused him. Webster's eyes met mine. We were both thinking of the glove. What name did this gentleman give? I demanded. None, Albrecht whispered. But his accent, American, clipped. His manner, threatening. I feared to refuse outright. Since then I have not slept. I believed part of his tale, though likely he concealed his own weakness. Still, a shadowy figure paying him to harbor evidence pointed to conspiracy larger than a jealous suitor's whim. We left Albrecht trembling in his room and stepped into the fog-draped street. He's either an accomplice or a pawn, Webster muttered. Perhaps both, I replied. But the hand that moves him is what interests me. The next day I set another operative, Kate Warren, upon Albrecht's trail. Kate, the first female detective in my employ, possessed a keen ability to gain confidences denied to men. If Albrecht had secrets, her quiet persistence would pry them free. Meanwhile, I turned attention to Arthur Bellamy, the banker. His offices stood on LaSalle Street, an edifice of stone and glass projecting solidity belied by the tremor in his clerk's hands when I asked for him. Bellamy received me in a spacious chamber adorned with gilt frames and mahogany furniture. He was a man of 40, with neatly combed fair hair and eyes as cold as coin. Mr. Pinkerton, he said smoothly, an unexpected honor. To what do I owe this visit? Your name appears among those who attended Mr. Whitmore's gathering, I answered. I inquire into the disappearance of Miss Whitmore. Bellamy's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of irritation smoothed into bland concern. A dreadful business. I cannot imagine where the young lady has gone. She seemed in fine spirits when last I spoke with her. And when was that? Shortly before midnight. We discussed music, of all things, though I have little ear for it. She excused herself soon after. His tone was too measured, his gaze too still. I pressed further. Your financial dealings have not fared well of late, I hear. Some might suggest you had motive to secure alliance with the Whitmore fortune. A flash of anger broke through his composure. I will not be slandered in my own office, sir. My affairs are my concern alone. On the contrary, I said, rising. They may prove very much my concern if they intersect with Miss Whitmore's fate. He did not reply, but the tension in his jaw confirmed the rumor of his troubles. I left his office with the sense of a man cornered, though whether he would lash out or collapse remained to be seen. That evening Kate reported back. Albrecht met again with the gentleman in black, she said. In a tavern near the river. I followed at distance, but could not approach closely without notice. The man kept his hat low, his back to the light. They spoke briefly, and Albrecht left shaken. The stranger departed by carriage. Destination? I asked. Toward the rail yards, she replied. The rail yards, vast, chaotic, teeming with freight bound for every corner of the nation. If Clara were being moved against her will, the yards would offer the perfect artery. The following night Webster and I prowled the yards under cover of darkness. Steam hissed from idle engines, lanterns bobbed among the lines of cars. We moved cautiously, ears attuned to every clank of metal. Near a siding we discovered an abandoned freight car, its door ajar. Inside, straw lay scattered across the floor, and in the corner glimmered a small object, a bracelet set with garnets. I lifted it carefully. The initials CW were etched on the clasp. She was here, Webster murmured. I examined the straw, disturbed recently, as though someone had struggled. Yet the car was empty, its captors gone. The trail, however, was growing clearer. Clara had not eloped, she had been transported like contraband. As we slipped back into the fog, I felt the weight of time pressing upon us. Each hour carried her further from safety. Still, the conspirators had made their first misstep, leaving behind tokens meant to mislead but instead revealing their hand. They wished us to believe Albrecht guilty, but the tracks in the shadows led elsewhere, toward wealth, desperation, and enemies hidden in plain sight. Back in my office, I placed the bracelet beside the glove and handkerchief. 3 artifacts, each telling part of a story, none complete. I would find the missing pieces. For Allan Pinkerton had pursued robbers across prairies and foiled plots against presidents, I would not be outwitted by men who treated a young woman's life as currency. The hunt was narrowing. And with it, the danger. Chapter 4, False Faces. The bracelet lay upon my desk like a silent accusation. Its garnets caught the lamplight in flickers of red, and I could not decide whether they glowed with Clara Whitmore's last hope or her captor's triumph. For hours I studied it alongside the torn glove and the embroidered handkerchief, arranging them as a judge might arrange evidence before a jury. Together they spoke of staging, a drama performed to lead investigators down a path chosen by unseen hands. By morning, I resolved the violinist must be pressed harder. His tale of the gentleman in black remained untested, and I intended to strip away whatever layers of deceit or fear still clung to him. Webster accompanied me once more to the boarding house. Albrecht opened his door at our knock. His eyes were ringed with shadows, his hands trembling as if sleepless nights had drained him. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said weakly, "I have told you all I know." "Then tell it again," I said, stepping past him into the room. "And this time leave nothing veiled." I motioned Webster to close the door. The violinist's quarters seemed smaller than before, the air close with the scent of resin and stale tobacco. "Who is this gentleman in black?" I demanded. Albrecht wrung his hands. "I swear, I do not know his name." He pressed a coin into my palm and bade me keep silent. When I refused to assist further, he threatened me. Threatened how? He said I would be found floating in the river if I spoke his name aloud. He stopped, then lowered his gaze. He warned that Miss Whitmore herself would suffer if I betrayed him. The word struck me as carefully chosen, as though rehearsed. I stepped closer. "Look at me, Albrecht. You were used as a decoy. But you know more than you admit. If you withhold the truth, her blood will stain your conscience. Do you want that?" His lips quivered, his eyes filling with tears. At last, he whispered. I overheard him speak once, when he thought I was out of earshot. He mentioned a banker, Bellamy. Said the man was desperate, and desperate men pay well for mischief. Webster stiffened. Bellamy's name again. "Why did you not reveal this before?" I pressed. "Because Bellamy is powerful," Albrecht said. "If I accused him falsely, he could ruin me. But if it is true, then God help Miss Whitmore." I believed enough to act. We left the boarding house and returned to LaSalle Street. Bellamy's office appeared serene, clerks bent over ledgers, the clatter of pens on paper. Yet serenity often cloaked rot. I entered his private chamber without ceremony. Bellamy rose, surprise flashing across his features. "Mr. Pinkerton, again?" "Yes," I said, closing the door firmly behind me. "This time, no pleasantries. You were named in connection with Miss Whitmore's disappearance. What have you to say?" Color drained from his cheeks, then returned in a flush of indignation. "This is outrageous. By whom was I so slandered?" "Names are my concern," I said coldly. "Yours among them. Where is Clara Whitmore?" His hands clenched upon the desk. "I know nothing. You cannot storm in here with wild accusations." "On the contrary," I said, leaning forward. "I have prevented assassinations of presidents and dismantled rings of thieves across this country. Do you think I cannot unmask a desperate banker?" For a heartbeat his composure cracked, his eyes darting toward a drawer in the desk. I placed my hand upon the edge, preventing his reach. "What is kept there, Bellamy? A letter? A contract? Evidence of your dealings?" He sank back, defeated, the mask slipping. "You meddle in matters larger than you know, Pinkerton. Withdraw before you imperil yourself." That veiled threat confirmed more than denial ever could. I left his office with the certainty that Bellamy was entangled, though whether as mastermind or accomplice remained uncertain. That night, I convened my operatives in the agency's back room. Webster, Kate Warren, and two others, McParlin and Bangs, gathered around the long table, their faces lit by lamplight. "Bellamy is involved," I told them. Albrecht was pressured to play a part, and evidence planted to frame him. The trail through the railyards proves Clara was moved under cover of commerce. I suspect she is held somewhere awaiting further transport. We must act quickly. Kate leaned forward. Then we infiltrate the yards more thoroughly. Smugglers operate there in leagues, and a banker's coin could hire any number of them. Agreed, I said. McParlin, you will pose as a freight laborer and mingle among the crews. Webster, continue to shadow Albrecht, he may yet be forced into further meetings. Kate, cultivate acquaintance with Bellamy's circle. He cannot hide desperation from sharp eyes. They nodded, understanding the peril yet eager for the hunt. 2 nights later, McParlin returned with word of a sealed carriage hidden among the freight cars. The men guarding it are not railway hands, he said. Hired brutes, armed and wary. They speak little, but I overheard one mention St. Louis. The clues snapped into place. St. Louis was a hub of commerce, a city where fortunes shifted swiftly and anonymity could be purchased cheaply. If Clara were taken there, she might vanish entirely. I organized a raid. At midnight, my agents converged upon the siding. Fog cloaked our approach, muffling footsteps. The guards, surprised, drew revolvers. Shots rang out, echoing against the iron hulls of freight cars. Sparks flew as bullets struck metal. My men pressed forward with precision, disarming 2 and capturing a third. The sealed carriage, however, stood empty. Straw upon its floor bore traces of a recent occupant, torn ribbon, faint perfume, but Clara herself was gone. Under interrogation, the captured guard spat curses until Webster struck him hard across the jaw. Bloodied and gasping, he at last snarled, "You'll not find her in Chicago. She's bound for St. Louis, under orders of a gentleman with a banker's tongue." Bellamy again. We left the yards with smoke still hanging in the night air, our prisoner shackled. I carried the torn ribbon in my pocket, its silk soft against my fingers. Proof that Clara had passed this way, proof that time was slipping through our grasp. Back in the agency, I paced the floor until dawn. Bellamy had allies, men willing to risk bloodshed for coin. Whitmore, for all his bluster, remained strangely restrained, almost as though he feared exposure more than his daughter's fate. And somewhere, in the labyrinth between wealth and ruin, Clara Whitmore endured captivity. I swore then, before my weary operatives, that we would follow the trail to St. Louis. We would unmask the false faces, tear away the disguises, and lay bare the conspiracy that used an heiress as a bargaining chip. For the enemies of justice could hide behind money, behind influence, behind masks of respectability, but not forever. The chase had only begun, and I meant to see it through, no matter how deep the shadows stretched. Chapter 5, The Underground Trail. The captured guard sat in the agency's back room, wrists bound to the chair with leather straps. He had given U.S. St. Louis, but little else. His eyes, swollen from Webster's fists, glared with the stubborn pride of a man who believed loyalty might yet earn him release, or coin. I knew better. Such men were expendable to their masters. "Tell me," I said, leaning close, "who hired you to guard that carriage?" He spat blood on the floor. "Ain't got no name to give." Webster shifted beside me, eager for another round of persuasion, but I held up a hand. Violence had its place, but a subtler touch often revealed more. I set a cigar alight, the smoke drifting into the man's face. "Your friends have already abandoned you," I said calmly. "Bellamy will deny ever knowing your name. When the law takes you, you'll rot alone. But speak now, and I might see you spared." His eyes flickered at Bellamy's name. A hesitation. Then, grudgingly, he muttered, "Orders came through a foreman called Briggs. Works the yards, but not for the railway. Briggs runs side jobs, contraband, passengers that prefer not to be seen. We was told the girl was valuable, to be kept quiet till she was on the southbound line. Where is Briggs now?" The guard shrugged. "He moves. Has a hideout near the river, maybe. That's all I know." It was not enough, but it was a thread. The following evening McParlin, in his disguise as a freight laborer, shadowed Briggs from the yards to a dilapidated warehouse by the river. Through broken slats he observed men loading crates by lantern light. At the far end of the building stood a makeshift office, where Briggs conferred with a gentleman cloaked in dark overcoat and gloves. McParlin could not hear their words, but when the lantern shifted, he caught a glimpse of the gentleman's profile, high brow, sharp nose, the features of Arthur Bellamy. When he returned with this report, I felt the pieces align. Bellamy was not merely implicated by rumor, he was orchestrating movements, using smugglers as his hands. The question remained, why? Was it ransom, or some scheme of financial leverage? Either way, Clara Whitmore's life dangled as collateral. I convened my agents once more. The girl is being moved south. Briggs is the conduit. We strike his warehouse tonight. But be wary, if Clara is not there, we must extract information swiftly before the network scatters. We approached in silence, slipping through alleys until the warehouse loomed before us, lanterns glowing faint within. Webster and Bangs covered the rear while McParlin and I advanced on the main doors. Kate circled wide, prepared to intercept any fleeing carriage. With a signal, we burst in. The smugglers scattered, some drawing knives, others reaching for pistols. Shots cracked, echoing through the rafters. I fired once, dropping a man who had raised a revolver at Webster. McParlin grappled another to the floor, his fists raining down. Briggs bolted toward the office, but I pursued, leaping over a fallen crate. He slammed the door, but I forced it open with my shoulder. Inside, the air reeked of whiskey and ink. Briggs stood cornered, pistol trembling in his grip. "Drop it," I commanded. His hand shook, his eyes darting toward the desk where papers lay strewn. Desperation overcame defiance. He fired. The shot tore through my sleeve, grazing flesh. I returned fire, striking his shoulder. He collapsed, the pistol clattering from his grasp. I seized the papers before him. Among them lay a bill of lading, carefully falsified, listing a special passenger bound for St. Louis under the name Charlotte Weston. The initials were damningly close to Clara Whitmore's. Briggs cursed through clenched teeth. "You'll never reach her in time. Bellamy's already arranged the handoff. By the time you sniff St. Louis, she'll be long gone." I pressed my revolver barrel to his chest. "Tell me where in St. Louis." He spat again, this time with blood. "Hotel Beaumont," he gasped. "Ask your British friend." The irony stung. Charles Beaumont, the critic who had feigned disinterest, shared his name with the hotel. Whether coincidence or deliberate deception, would soon discover. We left Briggs alive but bound for the police. The papers, however, we kept. Their codes and signatures would serve us later. The next morning, I boarded the train with Webster and Kate, leaving McParlin and Bangs to dismantle the remnants of Briggs's network. The iron horse thundered across the prairies, carrying us southward. As the landscape blurred past, I considered the stakes. Clara was no longer merely a missing daughter, she had become a token in a contest between men of influence, perhaps even between nations. In St. Louis, we took separate lodgings to avoid attention. The city bustled with river traffic and commerce, gamblers and magnates brushing shoulders on the crowded streets. Kate, in her guise as a traveling widow, secured conversation among society ladies at a tea room. From them she learned that a young woman, pale and withdrawn, had been seen entering the Hotel Beaumont 2 nights earlier, accompanied by men of stern demeanor. That evening, I walked past the hotel's facade. Its lamps glowed warmly, its doormen resplendent in uniform. From the balcony above, music drifted, violins, cruelly reminding me of Albrecht's reluctant role in this web. Inside, I secured a table in the dining room and ordered supper. My eyes roamed the guests. Merchants, politicians, gamblers. And then I saw him, Arthur Bellamy, seated in the far corner, conversing with a man I did not recognize. Bellamy's face was strained, his gestures sharp, like a man bargaining from weakness. I finished my meal with deliberate slowness, all the while noting entrances, staircases, guards. Then, with Webster shadowing discreetly behind, I ascended to the upper floors. The third corridor was quieter, lined with heavy doors. From behind one I heard faint weeping. Kate appeared from the other end, her eyes steady. "Room 312, she whispered. A maid spoke of a guest who never leaves, whose meals are carried in. We stood in silence a moment, listening. The weeping ceased, replaced by muffled voices, male, insistent. My hand tightened on the revolver. Clara Whitmore was near, but so too were those who had turned her disappearance into a weapon. The underground trail had led us from Chicago's shadows to the heart of St. Louis, and now the final game awaited behind a locked door. Chapter 6, Fire and Steel. The third-floor hallway of the Hotel Beaumont stretched before us like a gauntlet. The carpet muffled our steps, but the stillness in that corridor was deceptive. Danger lay just beyond those heavy doors. From room 312 came the low rumble of men's voices, then a sudden sharp cry, quickly stifled. Clara Whitmore was inside, I had no doubt. I motioned Webster and Kate into position. Webster pressed his back against the wall, revolver ready. Kate adjusted the veil on her hat, concealing her expression in case someone emerged. I rapped sharply on the door, adopting the brisk tone of a servant. Room service. The voices inside ceased. A pause, then the scrape of a chair. The lock clicked. The door opened just enough for a man's face to appear, hard features, eyes cold. His suspicion turned to alarm as he recognized me. I shoved the door wide, revolver leveled. Allan Pinkerton, Detective Agency. Stand aside. The room erupted. 2 men lunged from within, pistols drawn. Webster fired first, striking one in the arm. The man spun, collapsing against the dresser. I ducked as the other discharged his weapon, the shot splintering the doorframe. My return fire drove him back. Kate slipped into the room behind us, quick as a shadow. Amid the chaos, I caught sight of Clara. She sat in a chair near the window, wrists bound, eyes wide with terror. Her once elegant gown was rumpled, her hair disheveled, but her spirit flickered in the defiance of her gaze. "Hold fast, Miss Whitmore," I called. "We'll have you free in a moment." The uninjured captor tried to seize her, pressing his pistol against her temple. "Back off, Pinkerton," he shouted. "One more step and she's dead." I steadied my aim. "Kill her, and you lose your only bargaining chip. Release her, and you might yet walk out alive." For a moment he wavered. Webster moved swiftly, circling to flank him. With a sudden motion, Webster smashed his revolver across the man's skull. The weapon clattered to the floor as the thug collapsed unconscious. Kate rushed to Clara's side, cutting her bonds with a small blade she kept hidden in her bodice. Clara gasped with relief, her hands trembling as freedom returned to them. But before we could retreat, heavy footsteps thundered in the corridor. More reinforcements. Bellamy had prepared his lair well. The first intruder burst through the door, shotgun raised. I fired, striking him in the shoulder. He fell back, cursing, but others surged forward. Webster overturned the table, creating a barrier. Bullets tore into wood, splinters flying. Smoke thickened, choking the air. "Window!" I shouted. Kate guided Clara toward the balcony. I fired covering shots as Webster heaved the table aside, clearing our path. Together we climbed out into the cool night air. Below us stretched the narrow alley, 3 stories down. Escape by descent was folly, yet to remain meant certain capture. "Quick," I ordered. Along the ledge. We edged across the narrow stone ridge, pressed against the wall. Clara clung to Kate, her breath ragged but determined. Behind us, the gunman reloaded. One leaned out, firing wildly. The shot whistled past my ear, sparking off brick. At the end of the ledge stood another balcony. We leapt across, one by one. Webster landed heavily, nearly losing his grip, but I pulled him up. From there, we slipped through an open window into another room, startling a slumbering guest who shrieked in terror. "Police matter!" I barked, and we rushed past. We descended the back staircase 2 steps at a time, Clara struggling but keeping pace. The lobby loomed ahead, voices rising in alarm as staff realized a battle had erupted above. We burst into the night, carriages clattering along the street, the Mississippi's damp breeze in the air. Kate hailed a hackney. We bundled Clara inside, and I gave the driver an address, safe lodgings maintained by the agency. As the carriage jolted away, I kept my revolver ready, eyes scanning the street for pursuit. Only when distance separated us from the hotel did Clara finally speak. "Mr. Pinkerton," she whispered, "I thought no one would come. They told me father had abandoned me." Her words chilled me more than the night air. "Do not fear, Miss Whitmore. You are safe now. But tell me, who told you such lies?" She hesitated, then, "Arthur Bellamy. He came to me the first night. He said father owed him debts, that I was to serve as surety until repayment. He claimed father had agreed to it." Kate met my eyes, grim. If Clara spoke truth, then Henry Whitmore had known more than he confessed. Back at our safe house, Clara was given warm food and a physician to examine her. She was shaken but unharmed. I left her under Kate's watch and returned to the streets with Webster. We had struck fire against steel at the hotel, but Bellamy had slipped away in the chaos. We followed rumors through taverns and docks until near dawn, when a stable boy claimed a well-dressed man had departed the hotel in a carriage bound for the rail station. We raced there, but Bellamy's train had already left, headed east. Standing upon the platform as the locomotive's smoke faded into the horizon, I felt the old frustration of a quarry escaping the net. Still, he had left Clara behind, and that gave us leverage. When I returned to Clara's side, she looked at me with weary eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. "Not yet," I admitted. "Bellamy will not abandon his schemes so easily. But you are safe, and with your testimony, we may unmask him fully. The harder task remains, understanding your father's true part in this affair." Her silence spoke volumes. That night, as I recorded the day's events in my journal, I pondered the truth behind Whitmore's desperate request. Had he truly sought his daughter's rescue, or merely sought to conceal the scandal of debts and betrayals? The line between victim and conspirator grew thinner with each discovery. One thing was certain, the battle at the Hotel Beaumont had changed the game. Clara was no longer missing, she was evidence. And evidence, once revealed, could not be so easily hidden again. The war of shadows had become a war of fire and steel, and I intended to end it with nothing left smoldering but the lies of those who had tried to profit from an heiress's life. Chapter 7, The Revelation in St. Louis. The safe house on Locust Street was quiet the next morning, though the atmosphere inside was heavy with questions. Clara Whitmore rested in a small upstairs room, her hands folded neatly as if she willed herself to appear composed. Yet I noticed how often her gaze drifted toward the window, wary of shadows. I allowed her time before questioning further. Instead, I went to the telegraph office and wired Chicago. My operatives there were to investigate Henry Whitmore's financial records, discreetly but thoroughly. If Bellamy's accusation, that Whitmore had sacrificed his daughter for debt, proved true, then the very foundation of our case shifted. By midday, Webster and Kate joined me at the agency's temporary office. Webster brought news from the docks. Bellamy's associates were scattering. Some boarded steamboats, others slipped into alleys with purses heavier than yesterday. The conspiracy was unraveling, but we needed the fulcrum, the piece that would explain why Clara had been pawned like a banknote. Bellamy himself? I asked. Gone, Webster said. No trace since the train. He has friends eastward, perhaps even abroad. Kate unfolded a slip of paper. But here is something curious. I followed one of his men last night, and he delivered documents to the British critic, Charles Beaumont. I frowned. Beaumont again. His presence at the soirée was never explained to my satisfaction. Now he receives Bellamy's papers? What role does he play? Kate's lips pressed tight. He is clever, and he enjoys spectacle. If Bellamy flees, Beaumont may be the mouthpiece left behind. The thought troubled me. If Beaumont controlled the narrative, Clara's disappearance could be twisted into scandal, useful leverage against both Bellamy and Whitmore. That evening I called upon Beaumont at his hotel suite. He greeted me with a sardonic smile, pouring brandy into 2 glasses as if I were an expected guest. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "The indefatigable bloodhound. Do sit. You must be weary from rescuing damsels." I did not sit. "You received documents from Bellamy's men. What do they contain?" He swirled his brandy. "Correspondence. Financial records. Promises made and broken. Your industrialist patron, Henry Whitmore, is not the pillar of rectitude he pretends. He mortgaged factories to cover failed ventures. Bellamy held the notes. When Whitmore could not repay, Bellamy sought his own form of collateral, his daughter. The words struck like a hammer, though they confirmed my suspicions. You speak as though Whitmore consented. Did he not? Beaumont's eyes glittered. He begged for time, and time was granted on condition that Clara be kept from suitors until Bellamy secured marriage or ransom. A sordid arrangement, but hardly unique in these circles. I stepped closer. Where is the proof? Beaumont tapped the bundle of papers on the desk. Here. Letters in Whitmore's own hand. Shall I show the world? The story would sell handsomely in London. You will give them to me, I said. His smile widened. And why should I? Scandal is my livelihood. I leaned over the desk, lowering my voice. Because scandal cuts both ways. Publish these letters, and Whitmore falls, but so too do you, complicit in silence until now. Hand them over, and perhaps I forget your dalliance with Bellamy's schemes. For a long moment, Beaumont studied me. At last he sighed theatrically and slid the papers across. Ah, Pinkerton, you do rob a man of his entertainment. Very well, take your evidence. I tire of this city anyway. I gathered the bundle and left without another word. Back at the safe house, Clara awaited me, standing as I entered. You've learned something, she said quickly. I set the papers on the table. Your father signed away more than steel. He placed you in Bellamy's grasp through desperation. Whether he believed you would be safe, I cannot say, but his hand is clear. Her face paled, but no tears fell. Instead, her chin lifted with quiet strength. I suspected, she whispered. The men who held me claimed father's consent. I prayed they lied. But if you have proof. I opened the letters, letting her see. The words were unmistakable, Whitmore's signature at the bottom of contracts pledging assets, with a clause granting custodial assurance through my daughter, Clara. Webster cursed softly under his breath. Kate laid a hand on Clara's shoulder, steadying her. Miss Whitmore, I said gently, you are not to blame. This is your father's burden, not yours. But we must decide, shall we confront him, or expose him publicly? Either course carries risk. Clara's eyes hardened. I will face him. He must speak the truth to me directly. And so, the next morning, we boarded the train north. Clara kept her composure throughout the journey, though I could see the storm within her. She gazed from the window, lips pressed together, as farmland gave way to city sprawl. By the time we reached Chicago, Whitmore's mansion loomed like a fortress under gray skies. He greeted us in his study, rising stiffly from behind a mahogany desk. Relief flickered across his face when he saw Clara, but it quickly soured as his eyes shifted to me, then to the bundle of letters in my hand. "My God," he breathed. "You found her." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "They told me you gave me to Bellamy." "Is it true, Father?" Whitmore's jaw clenched. His gaze darted to me, to Kate, to Webster, as though searching for escape. Finally, he sank back into his chair, defeated. "It is true," he admitted hoarsely. "I was ruined. Bellamy offered reprieve. I believed it temporary, that you would be safe until I recovered my position. I never meant you harm, Clara." Her eyes filled with tears at last, but they were tears of fury. "You bartered me like property." Whitmore buried his face in his hands. "I sought to protect the family's legacy. I see now I destroyed it instead." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Clara turned away from him, toward me. "Mr. Pinkerton, what justice can be done?" "Justice will come," I said. "Bellamy will be pursued until he stands trial. And as for your father, the law may not imprison him, but society will. His empire will crumble beneath scandal." Whitmore groaned, the sound of a man already broken. That night, I escorted Clara to a trusted relative's home, where she would be safe beyond her father's reach. As I left her at the door, she took my hand. "You have given me more than freedom, Mr. Pinkerton. You have given me truth. Whatever pain it brings, I prefer it to lies." I bowed my head. "Truth is the sharpest weapon, Miss Whitmore. Wield it well." Walking back through Chicago's lamplit streets, I felt the weight of revelation settle upon me. The heiress had been found, but the true mystery was darker than abduction. It was betrayal, from the one place she should have been most secure. Chapter 8, Justice and Betrayal. The revelations in Whitmore's study had left the household hollow. Servants moved with hushed steps, avoiding their master's gaze, as though the confession of betrayal had stripped him of authority. Clara had gone to her relatives, determined never again to be bound by her father's bargains. I lingered in Chicago, not yet satisfied. Bellamy still roamed free, and Beaumont's sly games left a bitter taste. To leave the matter unresolved would be to dishonor Clara's ordeal. 2 days later, a telegraph arrived from a colleague in Cincinnati. Bellamy had been sighted there, traveling under an assumed name, staying at a riverfront inn while arranging passage east. His intention, it seemed, was to flee the country before the scandal reached public ears. I resolved to intercept him. With Webster at my side, I journeyed south by train, the wheels clattering like a drumbeat of pursuit. As dawn broke over the Ohio River, Cincinnati's skyline emerged, chimneys, warehouses, church spires. We went directly to the inn. The clerk, bribed with a discreet bill, confirmed Bellamy occupied an upper room. We ascended quietly, revolvers ready. At his door, I rapped once. Silence. I forced the lock with a practiced twist of my blade. Inside, Bellamy sat hunched over a desk, valise open, documents scattered. He froze as we entered, then slowly rose, his expression taut with resignation. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said, voice hoarse. I wondered how long it would take. "You have run far enough," I answered. "Your scheme is finished. The girl is free, the letters in my possession. There is nothing left to bargain." He gave a bitter laugh. "You think you've won? Whitmore is ruined already. His name, his wealth, his pride, all ashes. I only hastened what fate decreed. By destroying his daughter's trust? I shot back. By turning her into currency? His composure cracked. Do you think me a villain alone? We are all merchants in this world, Pinkerton. I merely bartered with what was at hand. Whitmore knew the terms. Beaumont saw the profit. And Clara, his voice faltered. Clara was collateral. Webster moved forward, cuffs in hand, but Bellamy suddenly lunged for the open valise. His hand closed on a pistol concealed within. Before he could raise it, I fired. The shot struck his shoulder, spinning him backward. He collapsed against the desk, blood seeping across the papers. He groaned, clutching the wound. So this is justice. I stood over him. Justice would be a trial. You'll live to face it. We bound him and delivered him to the local authorities, with letters and testimony to ensure he would not slip free. His wealth could no longer shield him, the scandal was too complete. The newspapers seized upon it within days. Chicago heiress nearly sold for debt, banker arrested. Beaumont, true to form, wrote an article dripping with moral outrage, casting himself as whistleblower. His hypocrisy infuriated me, but the public devoured his words. For once, his pen served the truth, however unintentionally. When I returned to Chicago, Clara welcomed me with a calm dignity. She had taken refuge with an aunt, and though sorrow lingered in her eyes, she carried herself with newfound resolve. Bellamy has been captured, I told her. His trial will follow. Your father's dealings will be exposed, but so too will the courage you showed. She nodded slowly. I cannot forgive him yet. But I will not let his betrayal define me. I intend to travel, to Europe, perhaps. Begin anew. Do so, I said warmly. Let truth be your compass. The world is less kind than we wish, but your strength will see you through. As for Henry Whitmore, the scandal toppled him swiftly. Investors fled, creditors demanded repayment, and his empire crumbled within weeks. I visited him once more, not out of pity but duty. I found him alone in his study, the grand house already stripped of servants. He looked up as I entered, his face gray with exhaustion. You came to gloat? He asked bitterly. No, I said. I came to remind you that your daughter lives. Whatever you have lost, that is beyond price. Do not squander the last tie you hold. Tears welled in his eyes, though he turned his face away. She will never forgive me. Perhaps not, I conceded. But forgiveness is not given, it is earned. Begin with honesty, and you may yet salvage her respect. He said nothing more, only lowered his head into his hands. I left him to his solitude. Weeks passed. The trial in Cincinnati convicted Bellamy of fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful detention. He was sentenced to years in prison, stripped of reputation and fortune. Beaumont vanished to London, where doubtless he spun tales to eager readers, leaving behind little but ink-stained footprints. For my part, I returned to the business of the agency. Train robbers, counterfeiters, political conspirators, there was no shortage of shadows to chase. Yet the Whitmore affair lingered in my mind, not for the danger faced or even the villain unmasked, but for the betrayal at its core. A father had bartered his daughter to preserve wealth, and in so doing had lost both. One evening, as I walked along the Chicago River, Clara's words returned to me, "You have given me truth. Whatever pain it brings, I prefer it to lies." Those words, I thought, were the essence of our work. We did not trade in comfort, we unearthed reality, sharp-edged and often cruel. And in doing so, we gave the innocent the one weapon more enduring than power or coin, knowledge. The city lights shimmered on the water, the hum of industry in the air. Chicago would continue to rise, as relentless as its railways, built upon triumphs and betrayals alike. And I, Allan Pinkerton, would continue to hunt the deceivers who believed themselves untouchable. The vanishing heiress had been found. But what lingered was not merely her recovery, it was the reminder that the gravest conspiracies are not always born in the shadows of alleys or rail yards. Sometimes they are written at polished desks, signed with familiar names, and carried out under the guise of protection. Such truths, once exposed, leave scars that no wealth can hide.